stoked to be here. It's my first time at Denison, and I have a lot of good friends from the area. And I guess in our allotted time we have just under an hour together, right? Probably heard a lot about guitar, jazz guitar. I just wanted to preface it by saying I'm kind of here for you. There's nothing I have to show you or I'm dying to tell you about that I think you all have to know. But what I can offer is kind of a perspective on how I look at the guitar, and I'd love to hear some of you play, or we could play duets and we could talk about it, and I can be very honest and that can be helpful. But I just want you to know that. That's kind of how I'm looking at this. Like, let's get into it together. I figured the best way to start it might be to play you a song, just to kind of introduce myself musically. And so I'll start there, and then as you're listening, if anything comes up as far as questions or things you want to get into, by all means, we can run with it. Does that sound good to you? Yeah? Dig it. Very good. Okay. Thank you very much. Get my guitar in tune. So yeah, my background as a guitar player, as I'm sure you can tell, is more or less in jazz guitar. I've been playing since I started when I was about 5 years old. I'm 23 now, and I've just always kind of been a guitar nerd. You know, basically interested in how it works, and playing solo is more or less a new venture for me. I mean, I spent a lot of time playing in groups and ensembles and a lot of improvised music and whatnot, and a fair amount in the bluegrass world too. But the idea of solo jazz guitar kind of bewilders me, so I'm trying to learn how that all comes together. But it's nice to be able to share it with you.
Let us know when you get together.
Okay. I will totally call you when that happens. It's a different set of issues. But anyway, are there any things that come to mind that catch your attention? I mean, granted that you're all curious folks.
How did you reach the point that you just, where you were able to do what you just did with that tune?
Well, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Well, do you all know that song, Alone Together? It's a standard. I mean, that's a tune I learned probably 15 years ago. It's one of the early ones that I kind of just really got into. And my approach to that, I suppose, is pretty whimsical when it comes to how to interpret a piece of music. What's essential in order to be whimsical is a really deep understanding of kind of basically the melody, the harmonic movement in the bass line. And I used to study a bit with Tuck Andrus. Do you know Tuck Andrus? He has a great duo with Tuck and Patty. He's my brilliant guitarist. So if you don't know, check out Tuck Andrus. I owe him a lot. And he used to have this way of learning songs. I asked him once, I said, well, how do you learn a song where it sticks? I mean, I feel like I'll learn a tune, but I'll learn like one voicing for every chord, and that's it. You know, I know the first chord is this, and I know the second chord is this, and the third chord is that, and that's it. And it seemed like a bit of a crutch. So he gave me a really interesting piece of advice, which was to practice learning the bass and the melody first, and you play them simultaneously. We'll start there. Let me take a tune like, well, I could take that tune. Yeah, fair enough. Really simple. So that's kind of your structure, right? The bass tone, the melody. What's interesting about that from just a physical standpoint to me has always been how hard it is to kind of coordinate your hands around a guitar, because, if you're playing a melody note here on a G chord, easy enough, right? But if you have a note up here, you can do that, or you just have to see that the root also exists here, or or like that. Beautifully intimate. So, the whole concept of teaching me that, he said, was that if you have the outer structure, the bass and melody, which he considered two melodic figures, which is kind of true, right? Then you have the freedom to fill in the middle. And you can fill in the middle with the third and the seventh of chords. So if you have, kind of voice leading, things like that, where you just, honestly, I'm not thinking the third and seventh, I'm thinking whatever scale tones are closest that I can actually reach without killing my hand. Pragmatism goes a long way. As a guitar player, you can just settle for shit that your hands can do. But what's cool, so I learned all these songs like that, and so what I started practicing was not practicing a set arrangement of a solo piece, but 10 arrangements at once, and you improvise 10 different versions. So if I were to do that tune again, it might be... it's it's just my approach. It's like one thing, I'm not very good at how Joe Bass did what he did. Or all the people I admire, like, God, Martin Taylor and all these amazing players. So I think of things very abstract, and I just see things, But it wasn't until I could understand a song from the bass and melody point of view that I could afford to just let go of it. And so that's kind of my take on that. I'm kind of a troublemaker with this stuff. I like putting myself in a situation where I don't have a good way out yet. Something's wrong with me, I think. But it's fun to cultivate that, because I think we all share that, You can't wait until you have like a killing arrangement of a tune to play it. You'll never make any good music. Or it'll take a long time. Any other questions about that process of learning or improvisation?
One thing I noticed, I saw Julian maybe when you were 19, with your group.
Yeah, right.
And what I want what struck me there, besides everything else that you did, was that you're doing your solo, your lead solo with guys coming, but your solo had this approach also. You did like a melodic thing, and then you did some bass stuff to complement that. And I went home and said, "Whoa, this is really cool." I remember those phrases.
Sure.
Traveling, and I think that can help even when you have the group.
Oh my God, totally. Remember, that's a great point. That kind of.
Yeah. I remember that struck me very, very strong. I said to my wife, I said, "I have to try that."
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, my biggest pet peeve, in all honesty, is this kind of generation of guitarists. And I'm very much a part of this generation where, guitar players want to be like horn players. And I think that's great, because there's so much you can learn from lyricism and tone production and fluidity and phrasing that goes with your breathing. Like, we all get it. That's awesome. But the guitar, to me, is an instrument that deals with polyphony, And there's sections. I mean, this part of the guitar isn't the same as this part of the guitar. They have very different characters. So early on, I kind of set out to capitalize on the orchestrational quality. And when I did that, I realized a couple things. One is that you have to be willing to set a couple things in motion at once, and then maybe just tend to one or another at a time. You don't have to do all the parts at once. And the other thing is that when you have a band, bass, piano, drums, whatever it is, that in no way cuts into your ability to express the guitar as an orchestral instrument. Because I want the bass player to sound like an orchestra, I want the drummer to sound like an orchestra. So that's very important for me, not to just limit yourself to like, well, I should play up here because the bass is down here. I'll give you an example. I used to be a nut for a lot of orchestral music. I still am. But specifically Debussy. I was really in this Debussy phase when I was like 15. It was like all I listened to, and I learned a lot of that stuff. And I'm not that smart when it comes to like, I don't have perfect pitch. I don't have a lot of inherent musical qualities that I see in other people that I wish I had. But I can kind of assess a situation. And I think most of us can. So I'd listen to 5 minutes of a Debussy symphonic work, and I'd say, okay, I'm going to write down on a piece of paper all the times it goes low, middle, and high as far as register, right? So just what I'd say is like, okay, cellos are going, and so that's low. That's this color. And then, flutes come in up here, and then there's something with the woodwinds in the middle, and then he does cello and flutes, and then woodwinds. You just take that much, like a little road map of range and register. Fair enough? And then what you do is you go to the guitar and you take a tonality. So let's say you take G, right? And you would basically mock Debussy in terms of the way he jumped. So, take a scale like, this is how I practice scales too. If you have, G major. Sorry about my tuning. And let's say the roadmap was roughly this. We'll just make something up. Low, cellos, flutes, cellos, woodwinds in the middle, right? So we're saying low, high, low, middle. Does that sound good? Real simple. And I would try improvising phrases that followed that. So I'd consider low being anything on these two strings, middle being anything on these two strings, and high being anything on these two strings, more or less. So I always broke the guitar into 3 sections in my mind. So what I do is this. That'd be the exercise. You're done. So do you see the kind of the spectrum that you get out of the guitar? I mean, we all do. We all know it in our heart that it's there. It's just sometimes you get locked into modes and it's easy to forget. So I would do that with a piece and flesh out and just make these arbitrary maps of like, I want cellos for 8 bars, then I want this, and you can do the same with volume. You know, say I want low. You know, you kind of assess the music you hear in really like layman's terms, and you don't get too technical. And that helped push me into this kind of approach a little bit. There's also a bit of coordination with it. You know, of really. I used to do exercise where you'd keep one finger. I learned that from Gene Bertsini, where you just kind of, get good at. These are all random voicings. I don't really know what I'm playing. All I care about is if I can keep that note on top. I don't know. So things like that where I really want to be able to have pivot points on the guitar. That's crucial, so that you don't always start your solo in the same spot every time. Your hand could be anywhere and you'll be good to go. Interesting, right? I mean, it's just one perspective. What else? What else piques your curiosity? Yeah.
Well, we were talking about how you felt there was a time where you would learn a tune and you'd have like one voicing in each chord and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And besides like doing that melody and bass note type practice, were there any other things you did to kind of like expand your voicing vocabulary, I would say?
Yeah. Voicings. Well, can I ask you some dumb questions, like the real basic, like you all should have an answer to it, but they're going to be different, I'm sure. What is a voicing? What constitutes a voicing? I love it. I love a guitar player like, I thought I knew. Yeah.
The way a particular set of notes are played.
The way in which they're played, basically? Okay. Yeah, no, what else? What's another description?
How do you set up the chord tones?
So already I love it, because there's two kind of different views, and that's where they're both right. What else? Yeah.
Which chord tones do you choose to include?
Yeah.
That you can play?
Okay, so yeah.
Particular organization of notes from the chord.
I love it. So some of the answers, like yours, imply that it's a structural thing. A voicing is something that encompasses a certain number of, notes that are indicative of a harmony, correct? And others, the way you semantic-wise said it, was kind of like a voicing is what you choose to play from the scale. And I know it's just a subtle thing, but for me that's a big thing, is being able to improvise what organization I want when I want to. It's very different than how I looked at chords when I was younger. Voicing, I got Ted Green's chord chemistry, and I just worked on A, the first page. And you just learn all that stuff, and it's great, but it kind of does you no good when you go to play. Or it can be a bit hard when you want to apply it. So I took this conundrum to Gary Burton, who I play with a lot, and he's a great educator, and I said, okay, what's the deal? You play all these voicings, you've got 4 mallets, like, lay it on me. What's your approach to voicings? I want to know what you know. And the person he cited for basically teaching him about comping is Jim Hall. He said Jim was the guy who showed him that voicings were not about fixed structures, but rather melodic, basically pathways that converge at one point in time, and then there's a chord. Does that make sense? It's like harmony is like a rested melody stacked on top of each other. So he had me do this exercise, which helped a lot with learning voicings, where you take a tonality, let's say A minor major, melodic minor kind of, whatever, however you want to play it. And you set a metronome, and what you do is you improvise voicings, basically, and you go between closed voicings. What's a closed voicing?
On the same octave?
It can be, but what's another definition of a closed voicing? Within an octave. The reason I say, The reason I say it can be is you can have a 6 and that's within an octave and it implies kind of a spread sound. I don't know if I even have the right answer, but I think of closed as being anything that's less than a fourth. You know, like that's more or less closed. 1, 3 minor third, fifth of an A minor chord. If you want to make it open, you take the middle note, right? And you put it up an octave. So it's 1, 5, 3. I know it makes sense to your ears at the very least, right? The difference. So what you do is you alternate. Let's say you start this exercise with closed voicing, and then I'll just go through it for you. I'll try to show you. Now the key to it is you don't have to worry about hitting chord tones. You can basically play on an A minor. You just imagine there's a bass player, really friendly dude who just wants to play roots for you all day long. And he's over there, and you just kind of imagine that. So if you play A minor, you know, there's nothing that says that that's not an A minor chord to me, because that's, you know, the 4, the 6, and the 9. Most people say, well, you're getting into extension territory, whatever. I think it's indicative of a color that you're going to want to access when you're comping. So why not? You know. So what you do is this. It'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4. So those aren't voicings that I was actually surprised by 2 of those that I hadn't played before. But what you start to see is that it's exactly your definition. You gave me the definition. It's this organization of chord tones. And if you really believe those words, it means any tones in the scale. You know, you can be very fluid with it. So if you see. Into these just cool colors that are, I would never be able to have the memory to know what those are as voicings, you know? They're just kind of moving melodic lines. Does that kind of make sense? So that'd be a great 10 minutes a day with a metronome. Close, open. Do that for like a week, and you'll play like, and it'll feel so interesting to you. You know, like, or something really simple, you'll be like, wow, who thought up that, you know? You have to have, yeah. Get behind the scenes and you appreciate the shit a little more. So that's one way to deal with voicings. You know, big thing about comping, not that anyone asked about comping, but as if we're talking about how you kind of break up a song, is the kind of rhythmic dialogue that exists within an interpretation. You know, what I did in the solo stuff a lot is basically play with never hitting downbeats, a lot of syncopated things. And when you comp for people, it's really more about the rhythm than it is the voicings. So if you really want to kind of test that theory out, ask a friend to come over and solo for 20 minutes over a blues and only comp with one note, and just see if you can offer enough support without needing harmony. And then one by one add a note, then 3 notes, then 4 notes. And then you start to be kind of in awe of how much shit you can do on the guitar, which is a good disposition as a guitar player. So it's interesting, yeah.
One thing that I observed is, like, I think sometimes we kind of start from the limitations of the guitar, you know, whether it be the intervals between the strings or the, you know, the cutoff points of the low string and the, you know, the higher notes or whatever, or your reach, things that you said. And I think one thing that I do that I would like to do less of, and do more of what you did, is not playing notes just because they're possible. You know, so like if you're playing a voicing on the guitar, you choose these 3 notes and you're like, well, normally, you know, I couldn't do this, but because there's this open string or because there's this possibility that's not always there on the guitar, I'm going to do it and jump on it. And I think that's when guitar players really start to sound like they're playing a guitar, whereas it didn't always sound like you were playing a guitar.
That's
and that's
so
something like
interesting.
I really want to be able to do better. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, no, that's a super articulate question and comment. Does that all resonate with the rest of you? Yeah, I remember, I'm like very lucky count my blessings every day. Every day. When I was about 11, I studied with Matheny a fair amount. And we would just get together when he was in town and we'd play. And my guitar teacher would come with me, be like, my teacher, me, and Matheny, we just talk. It was so fun. And he always had a videographer around, and all this shit's on film. I'd love to see it someday. But anyway, my parents are in the background, like waiting to drive me home. It's really cute. But I remember, the number one thing I remember Pat talking about was exactly what you just expressed, which was that he had a little bit of an issue, as I had understood it, with people doing things just because they could, and there's guitaristic things. I mean, shit that we're like, oh, we can't possibly do that. That's, you know, it's too easy. It's too easy. And to be honest, I kind of don't buy into that thought process. Maybe it's just for whatever reason. I don't judge it. I just don't. It doesn't feel true to me. I consider myself a very guitaristic player. You know, people say you should hear what you play before you play it. I kind of don't. My thing is, I'm pretty lame in this respect. I'd be like, how will I have heard if it didn't happen yet? Like, I can't just manifest this amazing line and then bam. It's like, I gave up on that a while ago. Maybe I should think about it again. But like that, having heard that, I now hear potential for that. Having heard that, I see potential for that. And I really just let it inform my decision making, but you have to have a certain reservoir of compassion that the first thing you play will lead you somewhere. And this is getting to something practical, I promise. I'll kind of gear it towards that. If you have, right? That's like kind of guitar lick, 101 in a lot of ways. I kind of try to not focus on the things that are obvious about it. That, okay, it's an A minor kind of pentatonic thing. And I look at more of the kind of movement, the gesture that's being implied. And so take something that you've played a million times, like that, let's say, if you have. And just take that gesture of pulling off and moving down the neck and just put it in a different position, regardless of what notes you're on, and see what you get. Do you see? Not that you want to play like that, but the point is that that thing that seemed kind of useless to you became an into hearing sounds of the guitar you didn't expect. Once you've heard yourself sounding other than you're accustomed to, you have this amazing power to then say, well, now you know you're capable, do you accept it? So I heard shit in there that I was like all that, I'm just moving my hands. I have no idea I know it's around the 12th fret. But I kind of want to know what it is. So if I get it, so I see like a G minor triad, and then you go, okay, what else? I see E flat major is kind of under my fingers, and so a lot of what I do is led by a kinesthetic curiosity. And I can't necessarily advocate that for everyone, but I think it's something that is okay. So yeah, that's one aspect. The other biggest thing which I think inhibits guitar players from actually playing the shit out of their instrument, so to speak, is that, exactly like you said, you get to the high string and you're like, well, I guess we're done. I'm going to turn back around, go to the low E. And then when I hit that, I'm going to turn back around and go to the high E. And it's this funny little loop that we just do, It's a... And there's nothing wrong with it, right? None of this is bad. It's a sound. It has certain, handcuffs on, and we all hear it. I've always been interested in range of motion as a guitar player. And there's a thing I started thinking about years ago where this is considered a big leap on the guitar, right? It's as big as they come, right? It's the low E to the high E, right? So, and I would practice these things and I'd feel, I'd be kind of sloppy with them and sometimes get it. I thought, oh, but it's such a far reach, such a far reach. And then I started considering this, well, if you took the guitar out of the equation, right, and you moved your hand that distance, roughly, approximate that distance, it's actually not a big distance compared to your stature, right? Everyone agree with that? So, well, what would be a big distance? Well, it would kind of be like if you went to the floor and then above your head. This would be like hitting the low string and the high string, proportionate to your size. I mean, it's goofy as fuck, I know. But, so you do this, you're kind of like, okay, so that's big. So then you put a guitar in that pathway movement, I can't even hit the strings. It's like, it's in there. So what I would do is do these exercises of going from gross movement to small movement. And you basically find, a lot of it's spiralic, kind of like figure eights. It's never going to be like this. This isn't how the body wants to move. And then eventually, a lot of the practice I do doesn't sound very good because it's not supposed to. And all of a sudden I start seeing that this movement was a portion of a larger gesture. And then that felt really fine compared to my own stature versus kind of compressing and pretending like that is my universe. A lot of us are whipped by the guitar. We're whipped. We're normal functioning human beings until there's an instrument in our hands. And then we just defy all logic and gravity, you know? We're like, oh, but this is such a big stretch to play a line from here, you know? Well, it's like, well, actually, that's kind of just like, it's this. So I used to just shed movement. Okay, you just get used to what it feels like. I mean, we're talking about shit that cellists know all about, you know? Violinists know all about. They don't have frets. They have to have a kinesthetic memory around their movements, right? So we're bringing that into it. It's kind of how I would work on a lot of stuff. I'd also take exercises where I take this, saying that note, and I would say, this is an F, this is an A, so what tonality does it seem like I'm in? Anybody? F and an A, what is A to F? F major. So it's F major. And I know that any note I play in F major will be okay for this line, and what I'll do is I'll basically start by just doing the outer notes, and then I'll add one pitch somewhere in the middle. Doesn't have to be the same one. And then maybe I'll add two. And then eventually as a listener, I would imagine, or I shouldn't even pretend to know what you hear, but what I hear as a listener is the same gesture. I can do 10 different versions, but more or less you're getting, that's what we're expressing. There's a million ways to do it, enjoy every one of them, you know, but don't, that really helped me practice scales too. When I stopped practicing them, like, do you ever practice this way and then you go play a gig and you sound like that? You all know that? So Gary Byrne, you said this great thing of practicing scales in random orders. So you know, F major. That's how you practice any scale, you know? Or you could. It's just one way. Just one way. It's cool, right? It's nice. It's nice. I have always been fond of things that kind of break that barrier between, oh, I'm a practicing guitar player and then I got to go do a gig. There's nothing shittier than that feeling of somehow having to haul all your passion and all you worked for and cram it into a set's worth of music. I think ideally in your lifetime you blur the line so that what you work on is of interest for people to hear. You know, and you have to be kind of creative with how you do that. One perspective.
One thing I noticed about the playing, even when you were playing from an amplifier,
Yeah.
is attack, changes volume,
Mm-hmm.
changes expression. It's as if you were breathing through a phrase.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's.
And that's, I mean, a lot of us are so focused on getting the note out into the air
Mm-hmm.
that you kind of overlook nuance that can be
Yeah.
offered that way.
Well, can I take what you said and just change it a little bit?
Please.
Nuance and dynamics. I mean, how many times have you heard yourself back in a recording and been like, God, I sound like every note's the same. Like there's no movement to it. Do you ever hear yourself? I heard myself on records early on. I still do it. I'm all, it sounds like I'm just like baka daka 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 daka, and like it's just like some robo guitar shit. And what I think you start to get in, the more you get in touch with melodic phrases and architecture and harmony, and the more you play music at all, you start to realize that dynamics aren't something you add, but they're rather occasioned by what you're playing. You know what I mean? It's like you play a melodic minor scale and your touch is that of a melodic minor scale. You know, you play an open E and you play like an open E chord. And so what we need is a very poised and responsive sense of technique that can really adjust to anything. Versus, this is what my right hand does and this is what my left hand does, and then you can plug in any notes. You know. Do you want me to tell you kind of how I simply look at both hands as far as they're concerned? The biggest thing that I've been encountering in my life as a guitar player is the fact that it's not about the hands. And I don't mean that in a ethereal way. I mean it's not. It's about your relationship to your feet on the ground and the way your body's organized. Your hands are as much as they're good at doing stuff, they're exceptionally good at feeling stuff, right? You can feel heat, you can feel pressure, you can feel texture. So the hands are kind of these amazing receptors that you want to be as unencumbered as possible so that they can take a read of the situation down on the guitar. Does that make sense? So, given that preface, the way I look at picking is pretty simple. I used to think about picking like you just hit the string, you know, and it's kind of you versus the guitar. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you lose a large degree of dynamic range. So what I started to think about was this. Kind of the best teacher for how to pick the guitar is the guitar that you're actually playing. And what that means is that each string has a certain amount of tension, right? The string is kind of doing what you do as a pick, you know, holder, whatever. It's taut, it's in place, and if you push it, something will happen, right? You kind of activate it. So I started doing these exercises where I would set my pick on the string with the thought that I'm about to pluck it. And what I noticed from a personal experience is that this starts to happen. I'm kind of, I just can't wait to pluck the shit out of the string. I mean, it's so funny that like even if you're well-intended, you'll have this kind of thing. So what I do is I'd wait. Just wait. It could take 30 seconds, it could take 10 minutes, doesn't really matter. But you wait until you realize that there's nothing you have to push through. No one's fighting you. The G string isn't, it's there for you to play. So you set it there, and what you do is you kind of let all this muscular and energetic tension subside. So it starts to get easy. And what I noticed was the string starts to feel kind of like a diving board. You ever just stand on a diving board? I'm usually too wimpy to jump, so I know that feeling very well. You're like, I can do this, I can't do this, and then you walk off. But there's that place right at the edge where you feel a pushback. So I observed that, and I thought, well, what would happen if I kept letting this subside? And what I realized is that if you keep letting it subside and all your force, I had this image of the string cutting through the pick. It's kind of like a tug of war, like this is the pick, this is the string, you're pushing, pushing. Usually what we do is we just go bam, like fuck you string, just hit it, you know? And what I realized is that I'd rather just meet it and then actually kind of move the pick out of the way so the string can come through. Does that make sense? And it's one thing I hope you all try on the guitar and see what it's like later. So you do that, you let it subside, you let it subside, and then when you want to play a string, you actually release. That's it. It's like it's nothing spectacular. It kind of falls out of the guitar. So I want to pluck. What does it mean to pluck? It means you actually release your responsibility of meeting the string. Oh, I can be easy. Oh shit, a note came out. So I started doing that, and it's great with upstrokes, because how many of you feel like upstrokes are this thing that you have to like pull up? Any of you consider that in your technical practice? It's hard to do upstrokes, or they don't swing. Instead, you're thinking, well, gravity's on your side, the string's going to drop through the pick, basically. It's very experiential, so you have to try to kind of know what I'm talking about. So you meet it, you meet it, you meet it, I give up. Totally give up. And when you get into playing this way, you start getting a picking sound that... Do you hear there's kind of a potential to be louder or quieter versus... That's where I'm kind of in control every time. So there's a certain degree of vulnerability where you realize that your job as a right hand is entirely dependent on the guitar. And its job is entirely dependent upon you. And when there's that 50-50 thing, I think you get the best possible sound. Everyone with me so far on the right hand? Any questions? Yeah.
This is like Alexander technique. I've been told that you also do that. Is that something that you think, you know, I guess it could be applied in any kind of gradation as far as you want to go. But just, I guess it kind of relates to what Stan was starting about. I'm finding that, you know, there are times when I warm up and I'm really getting good things done, but other times when I'll just oh, I really need to, you know, look at these charts and get ready for this lesson, you know, and I put myself already, and it's not in like a musical place, you know. So I wanted to ask you about kind of what you do when you're like Stan was talking about, like he's talking about just sitting with the guitar, getting your body in tune, you know.
Well, Stan seemed to have a beautiful sense of how he held the guitar. I didn't hear him